Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, folks. Uh, Welcome to this next session of questions and answers. I've received 5 questions in the course of the last week or so. Some people have asked me not to mention names, so I'll do that. I'll just sort of indicate what the questions were. I've got a list of them here. If you can have a look, we'll deal with them question by question. The first question is how do you deal with the claustrophobic fear of the grave? So if you consider how often in Quran the hereafter is described as a better place, particularly for the believer, and that the hereafter is described in terms that are truly ecstatic and extraordinary, then I don't think that this understanding that when you die, you end up confined to a hole in the ground until the last day. I think that might not be an accurate way of understanding what happens to us. And I mean, there's so many sources of information that one can draw from to kind of have a more informed kind of understanding of death. And the first issue is that if you want to be informed about death, know that you're trying to be informed about that which you are fundamentally uninformable of, if there's such a phrase. Because you're dealing with something that we are constructed in such a way by our Rabb not to have a deep insight into. If it is true that the life of the hereafter can be a better life, just hypothetically in the one that we have, why on earth would anybody want to stick around, given, if you like, the suffering of the human condition? So there's a reason why the delights of the hereafter are hidden from view. But what we do know about the hereafter, from both our shuyukh and from how Allah describes it in the Quran, is that it's certainly not accurate to think about it as being confined to a hole in the ground. We know, for instance, that Shaykh Ebrahim Answers described the hereafter dying, at least as going from the third-class compartment to the first-class compartment of the train. We know that in Quran, the hereafter, at least for a believer, is described in the most glowing terms. In fact, in such glowing terms that it is considered to be worthwhile suspending the joys or making a sacrifice of the joys of this world for. So I think it is a bit, it's almost childlike, dare I say, if not naive, to think that when you're going to die, they're going to put you in a hole, and that will be you for the rest of time. And that when you hear the footfalls of the people leaving the cemetery go away, you are left alone. Yes, you're left alone in terms of the companionship you had in this world, but who says you're not being introduced to a far deeper and far bigger companionship that you don't have access to right now? So, I think it is. If one has a fear of death because you concern yourself with being confined to a dark hole in the ground, for an indeterminate period of time until the last day, then I think maybe you should consider whether your fear of that dark hole isn't a little bit of a boogeyman that you're sort of entertaining, and that there's other ways of looking at your sort of life after death. I beg your pardon. So the next question is how do you forgive and move on? And I'm assuming that this is in the context of a relationship where you had a lot of betrayal and trauma in your life. Now, one must be careful when one explores a question like this that you don't get flippant and dismissive of the experience, because if I did that in this instance, I would be lying. I have in my life had experience of betrayal and hurt that sometimes took decades to resolve. And I dare say most of them have been resolved, and they have been resolved very often in the fullness of time. So I think in the first instance that there is an element of transcending or getting over experiences of hurt and betrayal, which are natural. I mean, it's a little bit like a mourning. A mourning, for instance, of the loss of somebody who's near to you. If somebody dies, for example, and it doesn't matter how close and deep the relationship was, your grief at the experience of the loss of the person will be different on day 600 than what it was on the day one. It necessarily has to be like that, because we are programmed as human beings to get up and move on. So there's an element to healing from traumatizing experience and betrayal, which is natural. And I think that is what happens. If you just allow the wound to heal, it will heal. Now, there's a couple of issues with this. I think one of the things that we do is that we interfere with the healing of the wound because we keep on raking up the injury. It's a little bit like the experience of having lost a filling in your tooth and your tongue not being able to stop exploring the hole. And it happens despite the fact that it gives you pain. Isn't that interesting that we do that as people, that we keep on going, raking over, repeating that, which causes us pain? So there's an element to interfering with the healing of loss and the healing of betrayal, of an experience of betrayal, which is about us repeating the story to ourselves over and over again, going back to the issue again and again. That really is not helpful. That does cause more harm than good. And I guess there's a discipline involved, which is about changing the narrative. First of all, the frequency whereby you allow yourself to run over the narrative, and that is a discipline. You know, when you catch yourself thinking about that thing, we'll decide to think about something else. It's not as if we don't have volition about what we're thinking about. We do. Not only do we have volition about what we're thinking about, but we also have volition about how we think about things. And fundamentally, it's about changing the nature of the narrative about the thing that happened from resentment to gratitude. So I can, for instance, I'm thinking about a betrayal that I had when I was a very young person. I was in my early 20s, and a very deep betrayal from a very close friend, somebody who I considered to be, uh, uh, you know, both a mentor and a friend. And it also happened to be that this person was a very famous South African rock musician. And at the time, it was very difficult to escape this guy because every day you'd either hear him singing on the radio or you'd come across a billboard advertising a concert or something. He was really in my face, and it was like, again, sort of this pain being raked up over a period of time, like consistently. But then I did get to reflecting, what would my life have been if I'd stayed in the ambit and the thrall? Because he was a famous person and I was kind of enthralled by him. What would have happened if I'd stayed in that world? And it became apparent to me that actually my own sense of person and my being actually would probably have been far more challenged than what it was than what it had been, considering that I'd sort of left that whole family or group of people. So if I were to be honest with myself, the life that I had outside of that experience was a far richer life than I had inside that experience. There was far more to be grateful for the new world that I had without that man than what I had with that man. And so that's useful to remind yourself of, The other thing that's useful to remind yourself of is just what you've learned by that experience. And one of the things, obviously, I learned by that experience is don't judge a book by its cover. Things are far more complex. And actually, I also realized that, that despite the fact that somebody is on a pedestal, they really struggle with very similar sorts of issues that we all struggle with, and there are issues relating to trustworthiness and integrity and things like that. So the point I'm trying to make is that when you've suffered betrayal and you are and you're finding it difficult to move on, understand that the reason why you're moving on is because you're doing something to keep it alive, because you're programmed to heal. Healing is like growth. Trees don't decide to stop growing. They grow because it's in their code to grow. So too, we are programmed to health. We are programmed to heal. So if we keep on experiencing the loss or the suffering of something, it is because at some level we are deliberately interfering with a natural process. That interference with a natural process is a little bit like choosing to put your tongue into a hole in your tooth. It's understandable, but you have to understand that there is an element of choice. Every time you revisit the narrative, the story about how you were done in, and you replay the movie in your mind about the experience that you had that produced this to you, understand you are deciding to replay the movie. So the first thing, you do have a choice about the frequency in which the movie gets played. Second, you have a frequency, you have a choice about the narrative of the movie. You can either continue making the narrative of the movie a narrative of pain and loss and betrayal, or you can make the narrative a narrative of, well, thank heavens, it ended when it ended. There was I dodged a bullet there. Look at what I've learned from this about myself. Look at what I've learned about my world. Look what I've learned. Look at what all the benefit was from that experience. Change the way in which you describe the experience from hurt, from a narrative of resentment to a narrative of gratitude. And then over a period of time, you're getting increasingly out of your own way. You're getting out of the way of the healing. And I think we heal quicker. The next question The next three questions are quite subtle, and they do need a little bit of reflection. So during a test, when you're outside your daily routine, how do you seek closeness to Allah? How do you focus on the outward manifestations, the synchronicities, the big events, and the newfound appreciation? Or do you focus on being still and going inwards? Sometimes I'm stuck in between. You've said before, God is outwardly manifest and inwardly hidden. Sometimes I don't know where to focus. Um, this this might be a problem of nomenclature. Um, sometimes when one describes something, you sort of, there's no description of anything that isn't both light and dark. I mean, it's because it's like shining the torch on a rock. Yes, if I shine it on this side of the rock, then I see the side of the rock very clearly, but then there's another part of the rock that necessarily has to go into shadow. Otherwise, this side of the rock can't be revealed. And so if I want to go to the other side of the rock, you know what I mean? So there's no narrative that tries to clarify things, that doesn't create a shadow. And I suspect this might be the case in this instance. So if I understand the question correctly, it's saying there's these two elements of our lives. There is observing the footprint of Allah in the world around us, and then there's the experience of connectivity, the depth, the inward stillness, and sometimes in the early burly of things, we get kind of we get so wrapped up in the sort of the spectacular nature of what we're observing that we sort of get lost in the movie. And I think that can happen. That is true. But the question sort of sets up these two things as binary. So the degree to which I am fully engaged in the movie is the degree to which I lose my experience of depth. And I honestly don't think that is true. I think that you can get fully engaged in the movie to the point that you lose the sense of being the observer. You completely engage, but you can stay engaged and at the same time witness yourself witnessing. So what do I mean by that? Imagine you're eating. So right now, if you could sort of eat, you're eating something, and you fully engaged in the taste and the smell and the texture of the food. Now, that's one way of experiencing it. It's perfectly legitimate and it's wonderful, but there's what we're trying to cultivate is a meta position. And what I mean by a meta position is a place slightly removed from yourself, watching yourself experiencing. It's placed slightly deeper in yourself. So there's the food and so on, and then you experience yourself experiencing the food, if that makes sense. It also means that you always reserve a little bit of attention for the inside, for behind the veil, behind the window of perception. When you are walking down the road, you experience yourself walking down the road. When you're sitting down having the meal, you experience yourself having the meal. You step slightly further back from the window of perception, and you give attention to the inner experience, what's happening on the inside as you experience it. That ability to step deeper into yourself, the degree to which you do that, two things happen. The first thing is that the profundity of what you experience becomes more apparent because you're not overwhelmed by it. thing. You can see it for what it is. And secondly, the pleasure of what you're experiencing becomes deeper, precisely because it becomes less overwhelming. So your inner depth enables you to deal with overwhelming outer stimulus, and it enables you to enjoy overwhelming stimulus. So I've had a lot of really unpleasant dental work in my life, and it's because I was a really rebellious child and I neglected my teeth. So much of my adult life, I've had to have these engagements with dentists who I find thoroughly terrifying, and I find the experience of being in a dentist's chair thoroughly terrifying. But what I have found is that if you can occupy a place inside yourself which is deep enough that while you're observing the pain, you're not designating the discomfort as overwhelming. You're just watching it like you'd watch any other stimulus. Actually, getting through that dental appointment becomes a hell of a lot easier. But while you are so close to the experience and you allow yourself the ongoing sort of resistance to the experience because it's so unutterably overwhelming, then it becomes an insufferable experience, and it really does sort of overtake you and consume you because it's such a hard experience. But if you move a bit deeper in yourself, so you can not you're not sort of overwhelmed by the pain, but the pain, you allow the pain to be sort of an object, something, an object like fact, like an ox. It's out there. You see it over there. It's not in here. The degree to which you do that, the pain is easier to deal with. I don't know if I've adequately answered the question. If I haven't, please do text me out to have another attempt. The next question is, would you make a distinction between the desire for things that could be in fitra, like marriage and children, and the desire for things like houses and cars and status? And how can we deal better with the fitra needs being unmet? When we struggle to let go, should we even be striving to let go? Letting go of material things feels so much easier. It does seem a hard pill to swallow, a harsh reality to come to terms with, when it seems as if your life is denied something which normal people have, possibly like children or marriage or something like that. I'm not sure that in this case that it is helpful to distinguish between the need for a car and the need for a child if you're childless in a childless marriage. Because I think the effect of both needs is exactly the same on your consciousness. And that's purely a survival thing, that you in a sense treat them the same. So a metaphor that comes to me in this regard is, let's assume I have something taken away from me, which is something which people normally consider to be part of the normative sort of course of events. Like I have an accident and I lose my right leg. Catastrophic. My right leg is gone halfway down my thigh. I don't even have a knee. So I'm in this very odd sort of like peg-legged position. Now, it is in a sense unjust, because the human beings are supposed to have two legs. And it's normal for me to want a second leg. But at the same time, um, how does it serve me to hold on to the conviction, even though it seems completely legitimate? How does it serve me to hold on to the conviction that human beings should have two legs? It clearly doesn't serve me at all. So, therefore, what would serve me is to find out, is to explore what in having one leg is a blessing, and to make the way in which Allah has configured my life and my deportment towards the world, the uniqueness of my deportment to the world, in a way that is a blessing, and then to accept that. Um, uh, so, so yes, I don't have a Mercedes Benz. You could say, but it's a lot easier to forego your need for a Mercedes Benz than your need for a child if you were childless, or your need for a spouse if you were unmarried. And, it might be easier, but I suspect that the fundamental process is the same. And the fundamental process has to be affirming what is there and not resenting what isn't there. Affirming what I have and not imposing the expectation of what I should have on what I have. Because that is obviously a choice. It's so much of our resistance to the world and resistance to the lives that we have is an imposition of an expectation that it should be other than it is. But what about the possibility that your life as it is a perfect life, and that it has within it a very unique, a particular refraction of existence, which is the singular contribution that you should be making to life. Maybe that's possible. Maybe that is the point. You know, Allah actually mentions in Quran that He says that you know, it might appear to you that it's unjust that you can have a kafir who has many children and you have somebody else who has no children. But Allah knows what we don't, and He gives us what we need for the lives that we are designed to live, and we suffer by imposing an expectation that our life should be other than the life that we have. And that doesn't matter whether it's material goods or what this person referred to as fitra needs. I think it's the same problem. And I think it's useful to treat them in the same way, because otherwise you present the challenged position that you have, because you don't have these fitra needs being met, as somehow justifiably more overwhelming than any other need. I don't think that's a useful and a helpful way of looking at the problem. Then the last question is, you mentioned letting go of chasing material or specific outcomes, but is it possible to let go too much? Is it possible to have worked on letting go, or to have failed so often you're forced to let go, only to find yourself feeling indifferent and directionless about your career? I'm going to read that again. You mentioned letting go of chasing the material with specific outcomes. But is it possible to let go too much? Is it possible to have worked on letting go, or failed so often you're forced to let go, only to find yourself feeling indifferent and directionless about your career? I don't think don't think, if I'm understood to have said that, you know, forego all outcomes as meaning, don't have them. That just become directionless, sort of live day by day, moment by moment. There are some ways of looking at the past from that point of view, and actually I do think there are some people whose role in life it is to do that, to be nowhere other than the moment that they're in. But I think one must understand the usefulness of having goals and outcomes. So we've used this metaphor of walking up the hill. We said there's two ways that you can look at this issue of walking. The walking could either be the means that you engage to get to the top of the hill. And that means that your activity is about the outcome. Or the top of the hill is your means to have a good walk. So that your intent is actually about the walking and not about the top of the hill. Now, you can't have a good walk if there isn't a top of the hill. You can't have good process if there isn't an outcome. So there's a perfectly legitimate place for outcomes. And there's a perfectly legitimate place for endeavor to a vision or some sort of a goal, but not to make the point the goal, but to make the point the eloquence whereby you are taking the next step. How well are you taking the next step? And the degree to which you make how well you're taking the next step, the point of what you're doing, is the degree to which the delay in the achievement of the goal becomes tolerable, and also becomes actually the best way in which you change direction when you need to change the direction. Because, it's that wonderful story. A definition of madness is to continue doing that which fails in the hope that it'll succeed. If you're doing this, you want to do this well. You've worked out that's the outcome. I've reverse engineered from the outcome step by step into process. So what do I need to do now? And I keep on doing this well, and it's to the best of my ability. And I look up, and the outcome is no nearer. Then maybe I should change the process. But the point is still that I'm only ever committing to doing the thing that I'm doing well. If I don't focus on the process, then I actually disable my ability to change what I'm doing. So outcomes are useful. Outcomes are useful because they help us to define process. You don't have a good process if you don't have an outcome. But it doesn't make the outcome the point. It makes the process the point. It isn't a contradiction in terms to say, let go of the outcome, make your focus the process, and then saying, well, you're not then saying don't have, I beg your pardon, you're not then saying don't have any interest in outcomes at all, or dismiss outcomes completely and be rudderless and directionless in life. I don't think those two things follow at all. I think we're only ever here to make the best, put in our best effort. That's our accountability. That's the thing we answer for. The outcomes are by a lot. And sometimes our best efforts are going to be inadequate, and the outcomes come either by an ingenuity which is demonstrably not our own, or they don't come, but it doesn't matter because we've still been struggling. We've still been engaged in jihad. We've still been engaged in endeavor, in struggle. That's the human condition, is to remain with a good opinion of your Rabb, with no resentment, engaged moment by moment in the struggle of taking the next step. Alhamdulillah. Thank you, folk who have come. It's nice to see you all. And Uh, those are the questions that were asked. If there's anybody else who'd like to ask something while we've got each other here, otherwise I think we can greet and until next time. All the best. Assalamu alaikum, Mahbub Saab. Nice to see you. You were on your side for a moment.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Are you well?
Alhamdulillah, I'm very well.
Alhamdulillah. Is there anything that you'd like to explore, Mahbub?
I did have one question.
Yeah.
Sometimes you talk about kind of striving to be like a fakir and sort of leaving the city.
Mm.
And practically in modernity, when people often have sort of careers and houses and families and cars, I'm assuming that doesn't mean just leave everything behind and walk off into the desert. So how do we sort of strive towards that?
I spoke about this last night, but I'd like to. So I'm just going to repeat a bit of what I said last night because I didn't know what else to say. The Hindus have these four phases whereby they describe the maturation of human beings. They say there's the first of early childhood, and then there's a second phase of sort of adulthood, sort of young adulthood, and then the third phase of being the householder, where you now have children and you have accountability in the world. And then there's the fourth phase of becoming the recluse, the sannyasin, where basically you go into the forest, you leave your family duties behind, and you become a complete. You basically become. You explore who you really are outside of who they've made you as a social being. Now that's the fourth phase, and all mysticism is actually about that part of one's life, the deeper part of one's life, which is who you were before you became sort of a naturalized, socialized human being, able to sort of use language and speak to others. So all mysticism about rediscovering your primal self, which is a wild being. It's as wild as the stars. It is a being of mountains and of wide open spaces and seclusion. And so that's true. That is that, and our path is about going in that direction. The first thing we need to understand about these four phases is that they aren't prescriptive, they're descriptive, they're normative. You will be a child. You will be an adolescent. You will be a young adult trying to make your life work, earning a keep and paying the mortgage and putting the kids through school. And there will be a part of your life where that is no longer going to sort of not float your boat. It's not going to be required of you. It's a natural process. And insofar it's a natural process, it's something that our lives are kind of aimed at going towards in any case. Now, one thing you have to understand about this process is that there's every step of the way is you answering to the context. So the big picture, kind of the overall truth about this is that you did not come onto this planet by your choice. You came here by an ingenuity of others than you. You are here by others than you. Not only are you here by others than you, but because as a Muslim you are not permitted to kill yourself, you also don't get to leave by your choice. You get to leave by others than you. The sort of the orchestration of events that keep you alive moment by moment, that happens from others than you, will stop working. It is by others than you that you die, just like it is by others than you that you came to be born. You are not here at your own behest. You don't exist for yourself. You exist for other than you. Part of the other that you exist for is a grand and vast thing that makes the whole human project seem puny and irrelevant. It's like Lilliput. These little human beings with their funny little concerns, and they're driving the car and the kids to school and the breakfast. It's like, I mean, your consciousness has been made to fry like really much more dramatic stuff. But you only get to explore that higher part of your being by going through this middle piece for most people. So, just like you came here from other than you, and you leave by other than you or because of other than you, you are here for other than you. You don't exist for yourself. Nothing exists for itself. Everything that exists to make a contribution to something bigger than itself. Everything is part of. There's almost like an ecology understanding of how the universe works. Everything in existence is part of existence because it makes a contribution to everything else in existence. You are here to make a contribution. You aren't here for you. You're here for other than you. And the first place that you then, the first right place to answer that is to answer, well, what is immediately required of me? And what is immediately required of me is to pay the school fees. It is to put the kids to school. That is, and while I have that as the theater that's presented to me, I don't have license to burn down the theater and to go and sit in the desert. I don't have permission to do that. The world is not giving, other than me is not giving me the permission to do that. I come, I exist for, and I leave for other than me. And until other than me gives me the permission to go and become the sannyasin, I shall not be the sannyasin. At least not for most of my endeavor. I might start carving up more and more time at tahajjud, and times when I'm not required to be useful to them, where I can start developing an inner experience and a depth of experience with my Rabb. That's perfectly legitimate. But if you're still performing a role in this world, and you're required to perform a role in this world, you don't have license to leave. This is a very important thing for us to understand as we hit our midlife. I have so many people, about my friends, people who I have a very high regard for. I see the person sort of the mid-40s to mid-50s, they start getting really dangerous and disruptive, and they want to burn down the city. They have this irritation of having to be part of this Lilliput. They kind of, now that experience is understandable, but you have to be gentle with how you get out. You can't burn down the city. You've got to wait until the doors open, and the doors will open, particularly if you trust that the doors will open. And what I mean by the doors being opening, it'll become possible for you to spend more and more time on your own, more and more time in your inner sanctum, more and more time in the wilderness, without it being perceived to be cookie or disruptive or irresponsible. It'll happen. So, unless you've got something else top of mind right now, there are two more questions in the that I'd like to explore. That from Abdullah in the message in the chat forum here. The one is one teaching that I've learned is to act in the best interest of the other in any given moment in order to forego one's own agenda. Sorry. How could one do so while also fending off personal harm in a situation? Related, how can one act in the interest of the other if this means punishing the other? i.e. not for the sake of one's ego, but for the sake of the person to learn, not to repeat the same mistake for their own sake. How can one achieve sincerity for one's agenda in such a situation? Is it not best safer not to do anything rather than to do something thinking that it's best for the other, but in reality it's ego-driven? How are you going to discover that it's ego-driven until you've acted? I mean, there's actually two issues in this. The one is how do you forego your own agenda in such a way that you don't hurt yourself? And how, when you act in the best interest of the other and confront the other, how do you know that you're not being ego-driven and you aren't causing harm? I'm going to speak to the second one first, and it relates to my legendarily poor parenting, which I refer to so often. One has this thing with one's children that I'm sure every firstborn thinks that he was kind of brought up in a boot camp because parents are so strict with firstborn kids. Everything's got to be just right. I mean, well, what do you know? I mean, you try your best as a parent, and the younger they are, the further down the line they are, the more they seem to get away with murder. And I think that's a pretty sort of solid experience for most families. So I had this confidence about my eldest son, which I've mentioned to him on a number of occasions. And the conscience was really concerned with me thinking that I had been far too harsh on him and I would say this to him on a number of occasions. I said to him, I need your forgiveness. I think I was too harsh. I think I overdid it when you were a child. And on one occasion, I said this for the 15th time, and he got somewhat annoyed at me. He said, I wish you'd stop saying that. And I said, well, why? I think it's true. He said, well, it isn't true. He said he had no doubt as a child that I really loved him and that I really wanted my best for him. And some of the happiest memories he had as a child was actually me and him going off to do things together, like going to Timbuktu and things like that. So it occurred to me that we're sort of quite harsh on ourselves. And yes, we're not going to get it right. We're not going to get it right. We are going to, with the best will in the world, when you act, you bring your absolute best discretion into the situation. There has to still be an element of ego in what you're doing. And in hindsight, you're going to think, good level, I mean, I've harmed this person. I've done something bad here. But how are you going to discover that you should have handled this with a bit more finesse if you didn't act in the first place? So the understanding that your action is inadequate, it doesn't give you license not to act. It's quite the contrary. It's precisely understanding that your action is inadequate that creates the condition that you endeavor to do better. If I haven't taken one wrong step, how do I take a second right step? So failure is part of the process. And actually our lives, and this is really what my conversation with my son brought to mind, our lives they really are biased to health. They're biased to work. That if you do the best that you can, your inadequacies, they kind of get forgiven. They come out in the wash. Just because you think that when you disapprove or when you challenge or when you confront, you might be confronting in your own defense, and you might be confronting out of an arrogance. That doesn't give you license not to make that confrontation. You still have to do the best that you can. Now, the second question is, how do I stop not defending myself. I think that was, let me just make sure that I've got that right, because it was really the first part of the question. Let me read it again. Act in the best interest of the other in order to forego one's own agenda. How does one do so while also fending off personal harm in a situation? Whenever I've acted in my self-defense, the harm that I was defending myself against got entrenched. It got worse. Whenever I was in the position where, when I finally withdrew from the drama, I still acted as appropriately as I could with the person, but I didn't come to my own defense. There was spontaneously an orchestration of things would happen that would sort of resolve things in my interest. So when you act in the best interest of the other, your life starts to work. When you act in your own interest, basically Allah leaves you to it. And that ingenuity, which is the ocean in which all things orchestrate in towards us, it presents the world to us on an ongoing basis. That ingenuity only acts in your interest when you allow it to. When you stop acting in your own interest, Allah will only come to your defense when you stop coming to your own defense. And there's a hadith to this in this regard, with Rasul was with Sayyidina Abu Bakr, and they were sitting there, and there were some people who were slandering Sayyidina Abu Bakr, and he said nothing. He didn't come to his own defense. And the Rasul smiled. And then at some point it got too much, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr came to his own defense. And then the Rasul got up and walked out of the meeting. So afterwards, Sayyidina Abu Bakr asked him, why, Ya Rasulullah, why did you leave when I started defending myself against these people who were speaking ill of me? He said, when you were quiet, I saw the angels running to your defense. The moment you spoke, I saw the angels leave. I do think this is true. I do think this is true, and I do have enough first-hand experience to be convinced that this is true. And then the next question is, one more question. How can one act in the interest of the other? It's pushing the, okay, no, we spoke about that. Yeah, no, so sorry. So both of those questions have been answered. All right, folks, thank you very much. If there's nothing else, I think we can wrap it up. Very nice to see you all, and maybe we'll do another one of these at some point. If Mahmoud Saab was so kind to remind me, because I forgot. Thank you for reminding me, Mahmoud. All the best, folks.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.